This is what's really amazing about this situation with David French and so many other people in our country. And we just saw it with the stats that I was reading to you from the Fire survey, where people are saying that a third of Americans think that our First Amendment rights have gone too far. People don't understand what our country is. They don't know our history. They don't know the basis of their freedoms. They don't know that they are standing on a foundation of such sacrifice and principle that people over generations slogged to give us. And they're standing on that foundation and they're stomping on it. And they're trying to tear it down because they don't understand it. Actually, I may have a more cynical view. I think some of them just don't understand it. Others of them understand it and nevertheless are engaging in this crazy, destructive impulse because, I don't know, they want to find meaning in their lives, but it's not going to end well for any of us if they continue to do this. So I want to talk for a few moments, though, about this Christian primacy in our laws, because clearly Mr. French, among others, doesn't understand it. It's not that we have a theocracy. A theocracy is a country where there is a state religion, and religion and religious mandates are imbued in all of the laws and procedures. You know, prior to the American Revolution, when we were colonies, there were several colonies which were kind of mini theocracies. For instance, in Virginia, one of the earliest legal codes actually mandated that colonists go to church every Sunday. That's more of a theocratic, rule of law. Iran and many countries in the Middle East are Islamic theocracies where they are ruled by Sharia law, where, for instance, there are certain laws which say that the criminal responsibility for women is younger than that of men. Those are countries where you cannot be another religion besides Islam. And you cannot have a legal system which is irrespective of the religion. The legal system and the religious system are very much tied together. So here in the United States, we don't have a state religion. We don't have a theocracy. By the way, there are a lot of Western countries who actually do. Britain is one such country which has a state religion, Anglicanism, and the King of England, King Charles, is not just head of state, but he's the head of the Anglican Church, and that seems to be a thriving democracy. I'll give you another one, these Scandinavian countries, which so many people on the left say, oh my gosh, those people are so much happier in Scandinavia. If only we were like Scandinavia. Well, most Scandinavian countries, including Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland, have official state religions. So this idea that even if there were an official state religion in the United States, that, democracy would be wiped out in 5 seconds, that's not supported by the evidence of other Western countries who have state religions. And we don't have a state religion in the United States, nor am I aware of really any, I'm sure there are, people, but I am not aware of any individuals or groups who have a serious push to try to establish a state religion here in the United States. And but our laws, the legal tradition that we have established, although it doesn't mandate Christianity as a state religion, it is heavily, to our benefit, infused with Christian primacy. For instance, let's look at the idea that all men are created equal. Where does that come from, right? Do you think the founders just sat together and they were just, these moral geniuses, irrespective of any kind of influence, who sat and they went, for all of human history, people have been treated brutally unequally, but we're going to put our heads together right now and decide that we're going to change that because we think so. No, they were deists or deists, however you want to pronounce it. It's like data and data. I don't have a preference on either one of those, but they took religion so seriously, and they read in the Bible within the first few chapters of Genesis that all of us are created in the image and likeness of God. And that applies to men as equally as it does to women. I love to cite this. In the first time that a woman is ever mentioned in the Bible, when God takes the rib of Adam and fashions it into a female, the verse in the Torah is, I have made you, Adam, a helper who is your equal. So immediately it is affirmed from the start of the Bible that men and women are equal. So our founders took those parts of the Bible, which we now take for granted. We think that they just exist in the ether, this idea that all men or all people are created equal. It doesn't just exist in the ether. I was just talking about Iran. Iran does not treat people equally, especially not women. It is mandated in their culture, frankly, in their religion, and certainly in their laws, that women are subordinate to men. That is not just an idea that we as a human civilization have universally accepted. It is a Judeo-Christian idea that we and our founders here in the United States took because they took Judeo-Christianity seriously, and they established this system, which David French is now saying, oh, it would be so bad if it were to ever take hold. It has taken hold, and you're the beneficiary of it. That's one example. Another example, universal moral standards, which should be applied to everyone. If you look at the 10 Commandments, do not steal, do not murder. I mean, those are things that we just took from the 10 Commandments, plopped into our Constitution and into our rule of law. And again, people think that those things are just, things that we would normally come to without God. I think thousands of years of human civilization where murder was rampant, and in fact, murder was sanctioned. If someone, raped your sister or did something horrible to your family member, it was actually seen as an act of pride, an obligation of revenge to go and murder that person. It is only really because of our Judeo-Christian heritage that we have created a society where we have these laws against murder. A few more examples to show the Christian primacy in our law. Men are not basically good. That is a fundamental truth of the Bible. And we have taken that. And that was something that our founders took so seriously, in fact, that they created the Bill of Rights, which is a unique document in all of human history, in that it specifically outlines things that the government cannot do to you. There are many countries which have iterations of bills of rights or, certain guarantees given to the population. But the wording of ours is so spectacular because it's worded as, nor shall Congress make any law against freedom. It is not ambiguous. It's not saying people should have a right to freedom of religion. It is saying the government will not take that away from you. And that comes from our idea that people need to be controlled because we are inherently not good. Ironically, as a final example, even the separation of church and state is a Christian idea. Isn't that funny? There's a passage from the book of Matthew where Jesus says, quote, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Caesar was the Roman emperor at the time. And to God the things that are God's. And we have used that as the basis of having a separation of church and state. But again, people fundamentally don't understand this. They don't understand our roots. Let's look at another clown, sorry to say it, but an absolute clown on MSNBC, who similarly doesn't understand how much we are all benefiting from our Judeo-Christian roots and instead ascribes these things as Christian nationalism. Oh my God. Let's play it.
The one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
You know what? I called her a clown, but she's right. I mean, she didn't say anything inaccurate. The reason I called her a clown is because she's saying it with this haughty superciliousness, oh my God, those Christian nationalists, they're so primitive. They're so crazy.
No, she did say something wrong. She said something wrong. She said that people that orbit Trump, these Christian nationalists that orbit Trump, Christians had a big problem with Trump when he first arrived on the scene. Do we forget this?
Of course.
That was the biggest problem, is they didn't think that Christians would support Trump as a candidate. And one could argue that Christianity actually makes Trump a better person than he was before all that happened. But they like to spin all this into cute little words that, they orbit Trump and that Christian nationalism is somehow bad. And that, yes, our rights come from God, unalienable rights. I don't want them to come from the Supreme Court or Congress, please.
It's just, I'm just baffled, because to me, it just seems so obvious and so obviously beautiful and such an obvious protection of all of us that our founders were wise enough to put in our Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know why they did that? Because if we are endowed by our Creator with certain rights, the only way they can be taken away is if our Creator takes them away. If men endow us with certain rights, then men can take us away. I mean, this is the thing that drives me bonkers, that frosts my cookies like none other, is that if you are, especially if you are secular, or especially if you are atheist, and you don't believe in any of this stuff, you should rejoice at the idea that our country holds that our Creator gives us rights as opposed to men. You should recognize that you are the beneficiary of that idea, even if you don't believe it, because it creates a foundation. It sets some things in stone. And it says no matter what men's proclivities, desires, rules are, these things, these certain rights, our right to be treated equally, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those are codified in stone and they will never be taken away.
Amen.
Don't say that, you Christian nationalist. I'm alarmed. I'm alarmed.
Hey, it's fine if you don't believe in God. That's fine.
Of course
you have the
it's
freedom
fine
to do that in this country because of the way it was set up. And I don't know who gets the credit with the phrase cut flower ethics. Mm-hmm. But we were based in this, and the meaning of cut flower ethics is that once you take a flower out of the ground, it slowly dies
yeah.
because it's not rooted in the base, which is Christian nationalism, which is why we are important, and you have the right to speak out against it and be free to do that. But the further we get from that you were talking about it earlier, people forget the history. They don't want to know it, and we become like hobbyist weather balloons.
Likely hobbyist weather balloons.
And fly away from our grounding.
Yes.
Which is why we have the rights in the first place. Go on.
No, you and others call it cut flower ethics. I call it photocopy ethics, a little modern twist on it, where if you have a document and you take a photocopy of it, the photocopy is going to look a lot like the original. But then you keep taking photocopies of that next document, and it fades and it fades and it fades and it fades. We're on like document number 8. We are just barely looking at the print of the original because we don't understand what the original was. And instead, we have clowns, absolute clowns, who go on the, opinion pages of the New York Times and MSNBC and give us this distorted idea that the things that have made us beautiful and free are the things that make us ugly and oppressive. And it is going to get ugly and oppressive if more and more people buy into that lie. So you were talking about cut flower ethics, you just said Christian nationalism again. And when you said it, when I heard someone else saying it, I realized that it really is, it's been made up to be this crazy term, but like most people who are Christian nationalists. One of my best friends is Muslim. He's a Muslim national, we have so subscribed to this idea that these terms, if we hear them enough, and people have said enough that they're so dangerous, we hear them and then we have this kind of like Pavlovian response, bad. It's almost like Trump, bad. Orange man, bad. Christian nationalism, bad association. Really think about that term. Is it bad? Let's look at how he defines it. This is picture 4 again. So he originally defined Christian nationalism as Christian primacy in politics and law. We've dealt with that. He also defines it as, quote, a cultural framework that blurs distinctions between Christian identity and American identity, viewing the two as closely related and seeking to enhance and preserve their union. And then he says the nation is a central actor in the world historical purposes of the Christian God, according to Christian nationalists. Again, this is what I said earlier. I said a lot of what he describes as Christian nationalism is just American Christianity. But he's saying it's bad. I don't have any problem with what he just said. I think that Christians should view their Christian identity and their American identity as closely related and seeking to enhance and preserve their union. I think Christians do and should view the nation as a central actor in the world historical purposes of the Christian God. I mean, David French earlier in the article, to try to, throw out a little bit of a bone and act like he, isn't as anti-Christian as it appears he really is. He said, oh, I recognize that Christians have had great influence in this country, and I'll give him credit for acknowledging that. And he said at the beginning, abolitionists during the time of the Civil War were heavily influenced by Christianity, as well as leaders of the civil rights movement. And he said Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister. Well, don't you think those people, quote, viewed their Christian identity and American identity as closely related? Don't you think those people, quote, saw the nation as a central actor in the world historical purposes of the Christian God? Well, if my asking that question isn't enough for you, why don't I read some quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. that would seem to corroborate the fact that he viewed his Christian and American identity as central, and Christianity was one of the primary impetuses in pushing the civil rights movement forward. According to Martin Luther King, quote, he advises us to, quote, always be sure that you struggle with Christian methods and Christian weapons. That's what he advised people during the civil rights movement. Always struggle with Christian methods and Christian weapons. And what he meant by that, he elaborated by saying, never succumb to the temptation of being bitter. As you press on for justice, be sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the weapon of love. Really, I was thinking I should order a Martin Luther King Jr. book, the writings of his. He's such a fabulous, fantastic writer. I'll read you another one. Quote, segregation is a blatant, I'm starting that one over. Quote, segregation is a blatant denial of the unity which we all have in Jesus Christ. Talk about viewing your American identity and your Christian identity as closely related. Talk about viewing, your nation as a central actor in the purposes of your God. Quote, segregation is a blatant denial of the unity which we all have in Jesus Christ. And David French thinks this is a bad thing, viewing life this way. By the way, quick recommendation of a book. 100 Bible verses that made America. It wasn't just abolitionists. It wasn't just leaders of the civil rights movement. This book is so spectacular in showing the many different ways from our founding until now that people have been positively influenced by the Bible. Just to give a few examples, they have these chapters on the various prayers that President Lincoln said before he went to bed every night, the parts of the Bible which he heavily relied on as he was, the leader of our country during the Civil War. They also talk about the way that the Bible influenced FDR when he was president of the United States during World War II. I would really encourage Mr. French to read this book and then come back to me and tell me if he thinks Christian primacy in politics and law and tying American and Christian identities together has been a net positive or a net negative with regard to the history of our nation. And then just a quick final definition here before we move on to the, I promise, quick next part. He says, this is picture 5, he gives another definition, which again, I don't think is so bad. And he's quoting a Christian group, which is their definition of Christian nationalism. It's when, quote, public life is rooted in Christianity and its moral vision, which should be honored by the state and other institutions, both public and private. And he calls this, David French calls this, quote, an extraordinary and ominous ideological statement. Well, my question for him is, well, what do you want? I don't understand. What is your alternative? Do you want the country not to have Christian values? Do you not want our public life to be rooted in Christians' moral vision? Because let me tell you, you think it's going to be so good if it's not rooted in Christianity's moral vision? You come back to me when that happens, and I have a feeling that you will be begging, praying for a return of Christian nationalism. And then he gives these examples, or he tries to give these examples of these alleged Christian nationalists who are posing such a grave threat. He talks about Donald Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White, and the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, Tom Parker. And he says that these people are a part of the 7 Mountain Mandate. And here's a critical component. David French says that the 7 Mountain Mandate tells its adherents to rule over 7 areas of our country: government, media, politics, etc. I looked up the 7 Mountain Mandate, and it doesn't advise them to rule. It advises them to try to reach and influence those 7 areas of the country. That's according to generals.org. Got to know your facts. So finally, I just want to talk about when David French starts talking about identity politics, because I hope that we've already established that his idea of Christian nationalism is really just Christianity, and it really is beautiful, and it really is a guarantor of our freedoms, and it certainly does not pose a threat to our Constitution or is not cause for alarm. But there's another really important part of his article where he's talking about identity politics, and he is lamenting the existence of Christian identity politics. Let's look at this, picture number 9. He laments the fact that, quote, "The use of Christianity as an unofficial but necessary qualification for office is a routine part of politics in most church-going parts of America." He's saying that like that's a bad thing. Well, I may be crazy, but I remember an instance quite recently where something like this happened, where there was a unofficial but necessary qualification for an office. Shall we go back and remind ourselves? Video 10.
The president now promising his nominee will uphold Breyer's legacy, and he's vowing to fulfill his campaign pledge to nominate the first black woman to the Supreme Court.
Person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court. It's long overdue in my view. I made that commitment during the campaign for president, and I will keep that commitment.
So it's bad if Christians would like to see a Christian in office as a unofficial but necessary qualification for that individual in politics. But it's totally okay if a black person or an LGBTQ person wants to do the same. This is the problem. We are now in a country where for some groups, identity politics is heavily encouraged and in fact sometimes mandated. And then for other groups, it's forbidden and completely discouraged. You cannot run a nation on that. You cannot run a nation on telling people, if you aren't white and aren't Christian, your group identity has to be paramount. But if you are white and you are Christian, you can't ever think in terms of your group identity. You literally cannot have a society based on those conflicting principles. Let's read just a final quote of what David French said on this identity politics subject. He said, quote, "But what is Christian identity politics but another form of Christian supremacy? Well, is black or LGBTQ or a woman or feminist or, immigrant identity politics forms of supremacy of those groups? Would he say the same thing about black identity politics, for instance? I don't think so." He goes on, quote, "How does Christian identity alone make a person a better candidate for office? After all, many of the worst actors in American politics are professed believers. Scandal and corruption are so pervasive in the church that when people say I'm a Christian, it tells me almost nothing about their wisdom or virtue." Well, look, his point is somewhat taken that just because you're a Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good person, right? Dennis and I talk about this a lot on Dennis and Julie, how sometimes religion can be a false god. And there are many religious people who, in the name of God, do things that they claim to be good, but actually aren't. But here's the thing, when he goes, how does a Christian identity alone make a person a better candidate for office? I don't think he would say that if the word was black instead of Christian. He would not say, how does black identity alone make a person a better candidate for office? Maybe he would. I don't think he would. So here's what I want to highlight. It is far more reasonable to think that a Christian identity alone makes a person a better candidate than a black or female or lesbian or bisexual identity alone. Why? Because you choose to be a Christian. Christianity is a values-based belief. You choose that. You don't choose being black or LGBTQ or a woman. So actually, it is a better indicator if you look at someone who's a Christian as opposed to someone with an immutable characteristic, because it's value-based and it's choice-based. Just saying. And then finally, I know I said last quote, but there's just so many quotes in this thing that I want to throw out to you and show you how ridiculous they are. This one is just really offensive. He is talking more about Christian identity politics and the, quote, intense emotion that many Christians feel. And he says, quote, that fervor can make believers gullible and potentially even dangerous. It's a good versus evil dynamic that can make Christians believe that their political opponents are capable of anything, including stealing an election. I just reject those labels. Intense emotion, fervor, gullible, you know? Of course, there are some individuals, Christians and non-Christians, who fit that bill. But it's painting Christians with one broad brush and saying that all these people are these rabid Trump supporters and they're just blindly following this guy. It's like the Guardian article that we profiled on the show a few days ago, where they said of Trump, quote, he had the faithful eating out of the palm of his hand. That's dog whistling. That's, you know, going, oh, he had the faithful, wink, wink, nod, nod, you know, these Christians who just blindly follow Trump. And the example that he cited is, you know, Christians believe that their political components are capable of anything, including stealing an election. Well, when people raise questions about the legitimacy of the 2020 election, it's not because they're blindly following their deity, Trump, and whatever that guy says. It's because they have a brain in their heads and they saw what happened in the lead up to the 2020 election, and it was shady. They saw the State Farm Arena where they sent the poll workers who were Republican home, and then they pulled out the ballots and started putting ballots through the machines. They saw that Mark Zuckerberg gave $450 million to privatize election procedures, which amended, among other things, signature requirements and identification requirements in various states. They saw that big tech suppressed conservative content, including the Hunter Biden laptop story. So this is just a crazy idea, and it's bigoted, in fact, to go, oh, these gullible Christians are just following their deity. Come on, give me a break. So in closing, you know, the thing about people like David French and Rob Reiner is that anti-Christian sentiment, and I think anti-Christian bigotry, is not just acceptable, but it is compulsory in these circles that these individuals run in. In order to be a columnist at the New York Times and go to the film festivals and be a part of the left-wing elite in this country, you have to talk this talk. And these people, they want Christian principles when they want it. They want freedom of speech. They want equality. They want religious liberty when they want it. They want separation of church and state when they want it. But then when it makes them a paycheck, they can smear and slimeball Christianity at will. And as I said, I think that they will see what a society looks like that turns away from Christian principles. It's not going to be so good.